Hi, everybody. Welcome to Q&K. I am Shannon Q, and unfortunately, my secret husband Kyle is still under the weather this evening. But I found this gentleman wandering the streets, and he's agreed to co-host with me. So I'm just kidding. Everybody here knows the amazing Aron. Hi, Aron. Say hello to everybody.
How's everybody doing?
So Aron
Great.
he was already going to be on the stream with us, so he has decided to take on co-hosting duties with me this evening. So thank you so much, Aron. I'm really excited that you are here with us. And we are going to be having a really important conversation this evening. I'm very, very excited to have all of our guests with us this evening. We've been in a group chat, and our group chat has been very educational, very interesting, and at times fiery. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation tonight. So we have several amazing trans women here with us this evening who are going to be having a conversation with Aron and I regarding allyship and also issues that you are facing in the broader community, the social media community, the YouTube community, and just society at large. So we're going to be doing a lot of asking questions and a lot of listening this evening, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. Before we get started, I'd like to start by introducing our guests. So I am going to go clockwise, starting above me. So Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and where they can find you?
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here with you. I haven't spoken to you before. It's great to be here with all guests, with Aron, who I'm a great fan. And yeah, it's I have a YouTube channel. I'm Sarah Michel. You can find me on my channel. It's just my name, Sarah Michel. You can also find me on Twitter at True Sarah Michel. And my channel deals with a bunch of stuff: atheism, philosophy, politics, what you usually get from skeptics. What I've been dealing a lot about lately, it's regarding trans and free speech issues, because they are usually very close related. Unlike some people who in my community, in the LGBT community, I call myself a free speech champion. I advocate for almost absolutely free speech. I still think there's, of course, should be some restrictions, but I think that even speech that most people would say are hateful and despicable should be allowed to say. So that is something that I might have some disagreements and with a large part of the community. Also, what I do every week is I challenge God. That is something I do in my channel. I do a live stream every week where I challenge God to provide evidence of his existence. Yeah, so far God hasn't provided me any evidence. I'm still an atheist. So that is something I'm still waiting to see what's gonna happen there. But yeah, it's something. That's are the usual things I deal with. I deal a lot with philosophy, science, and politics. These are the three main things that I talk about in my channel. So if you are into those things, go check it out.
Perfect. And I have everybody's channel links in the description too, so please go check them out. And Jenny, please introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are and where to find you.
Hi. Yep. Hi, I'm Jenny. You can find me on Nuanced Nonsense with May. That's our YouTube channel. Or catch up with me on Twitter on @thedonkeytree. I'm just an Aussie girl who's really glad just to be here and talking about all of this stuff with you guys.
I'm glad you're here too. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And
don't worry.
you're good. Next we have May. May, the same to you. Tell everybody who you are and where they can find you.
Hey, I'm May. I'm a non-binary trans woman. I'm mostly just absurd or stuck in the middle of dumpster fires on Twitter. You can find me there at MayGriffin64. And you can also find me on the Nuanced Nonsense podcast as well with my co-host Jenny. And yeah, I'm just, I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of just my own thing. So
awesome.
that's it.
You're great. All right, and last but not least, we have Calon. Calon, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody where they can find you as well.
Hello, I'm Calon. I'm also trans. And you can find me at Paulogia, where we go over various things related to polytheism. And I guess that kind of makes me unique here since I'm the only theist. And you can also find me on Twitter at Resprit, which I know a lot of you are probably not going to be able to spell, so I hope it's linked down below.
Oh, I will. I actually didn't put your Twitter handles in, but I will after we're done with the video. I'll make sure that I add them to the description next to your channel. The channels are definitely there already, though. All right, so we're gonna get our conversation started. Aron just had to step away because his dogs have decided that they want to be on the show. So one of the reasons that we wanted to have this, that's right, they've drug him off. So one of the reasons that we wanted to have this conversation is because there's some contention regarding allyship and who can identify as an ally, how you can identify as an ally, what you need to do to be an ally, who can self-identify as an ally, whether you can self-identify as an ally, and what all of that entails. So the best path towards better understanding these issues is to speak directly to the people that they most pertinently pertain to. So I appreciate all of you coming here. I know that this is not always an easy conversation to have. So your willingness to be here with us, it means a great deal to me, because there may be some difficult questions this evening. So ahead of time, I appreciate all of you giving me the time. So perhaps I'll start just by asking a fairly, what seems like it might be a simple question, but I think the answer is going to be fairly complex, and probably deviate and differ between the group here. So what would you consider, what would a person have to do, or who would you consider to be an ally? Like, what types of actions would you attribute to somebody that you considered an ally? And I guess I'll start the same way I started earlier. I'll start with Sarah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the first problem that is in the question is to understand what is an ally, what does it entail, and why do we even use that word? And I had actually this discussion with a person on my YouTube channel, on one of my comments, who are questioning the use of the term ally. I think we use the term ally because we understand that we are in a sort of ideological war, especially with conservative religious people who think that LGBT people shouldn't even exist, or shouldn't even have the right to just be themselves. And I think that is the main war when it comes to LGBT people. People who actually believe that our lifestyle or choices or expression should be outlawed. And I think that is the main war and the main reason why we use the word ally. At least that's how I see it. I'm, of course, open to listen to other interpretations. And I think ally would be anyone who would be on our side in this ideological battle. People who simply think that we have the right to exist, that we have the right to express ourselves without any restriction to our liberty to do so, that people are free to mind their own business when it comes to matters that don't influence anyone else. So I think ally doesn't necessarily has to be someone who is actively advocating with us, but simply someone who isn't advocating against us. I think anyone in that situation, in my opinion, would qualify as an ally.
Okay, so I'm going to jump over to. Oh, I'm so sorry. There's a little bit of a lag, Sarah. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Did you have another thought to put in?
No.
Okay.
Oh, no.
I was just gonna, and I just want to let you guys all know, if you feel at any point in time that you want to jump in and ask a question too, please do. This is an open dialogue. It's not just me asking questions and waiting for answers. It's more beneficial if we all contribute together. So please don't wait on me. Jump in whenever you feel as though you have a question yourself. So I'm going to throw the same question over to Calon, and I'm going to add, or am I pronouncing your name right? Is it Calon or Calon?
Calon.
Calon? I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's a
Calon. I'm so sorry.
fairly common mistake, actually. It's Welsh.
Oh, okay,
Oh, yeah.
cool. So I'll throw the same question over to you, Calon, and I'd also add the caveat. Do you feel as though there's somebody who could self-identify as an ally, but demonstrates behaviors that you feel as though would mark them as an ally in name alone?
Yeah, so anyone can identify as an ally, but who's actually an ally is a different matter. In order to be an ally, one, you must obviously, for the trivial case, you have to clearly have an explicit affirmative attitude towards us. If you don't respect us, I'm not going to respect you. But with that, and what a lot of people tend to miss, are also the implicit cognition there. You have to have an implicit attitude, or at least be working towards an implicit attitude that is favorable to us. So this gets into a little thing called implicit bias, which everyone has, and it's not even a bad thing to necessarily have. In fact, you can't avoid having it because it's literally seen as sort of like a continuum between sort of all these different points. But if you just simply keep saying you're an ally, and then let's say you show a clip of Seth Rogen in your video calling a trans person with improper pronouns, or saying that a trans woman is stealing a college scholarship from a cis woman, then yeah, you're no ally at that point. You have to always be constantly supporting us. You can't waver in that support, as far as I'm concerned. And you can make mistakes, and you can always come back, so to speak, to being an ally. But when you do stuff of that nature, at that point, you're not an ally in actions.
Okay. So you feel
If
as
I could
though...
tack something onto that,
Please.
I wish when I was running for my short and failed run for state senate in Texas, I was very much looking forward to debating my opponent, the ultra right wing, who was his whole motivation, his number one priority, apart from build that wall, was to make sure that trans people can't pee. And I had a beautiful debate set up for this guy, and it was gonna so humiliate him. And I'm really disappointed that I never got to do the political debate that would have shown up how bigoted he was. But it's rare that I get an opportunity
when we were doing our idiocy.
All right, and I'll step back.
All right. So it sounds to me, Calon, as though what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're all subject to a certain degree of implicit bias. And I can agree with that, because everybody has their own biases. And that you may identify as an ally, or perhaps even think that you're an ally, but act in a fashion that's not in accord with allyship, because you are doing things due to that bias that contravene the best interest of the groups that you're saying you're an ally for. Is that a fair summation? Oh, did we lose you, Calon? Oh, I think I might have lost Calon.
Right.
Does anybody... Oh, are you back?
Here?
Did you hear what I just said?
Sorry. Yes, I heard what you said.
Okay.
So
Is that a fair summation?
here's the difficult thing with implicit bias, is that you may not even realize that you have it. So it's like,
Right.
to use an example from race, I'll often hear white folk saying, okay, I'm not racist against black people. I support equal rights and everything. And yet when they are, when a black person walks to them, they'll instantly walk to the other side of the road.
Okay. So you feel as though they have a bias internally regarding...
Am I allowed to add something?
Of course, everybody can jump in
Absolutely,
whenever
yes.
they feel. Please, yeah.
Ideally,
absolutely.
this would be
Go
an
ahead,
open
Sarah.
conversation. If we can all take turns, we don't care which order you guys want to speak in.
No, God, no.
I just think that we also need to acknowledge here that implicit bias can be also positive. You might have a positive bias towards something that you might be unreasonably.
It depends on
yeah, you could have that too. Oh yeah, it's just something that I think it's important to add. I
It
am not
can't
saying
be
that you don't
implicit bias.
you don't acknowledge
The
that.
research that I've been reading will apply both on stereotypes and attitudes. Attitude is like sort of your psychological disposition towards something, whether I like this or I like that in this case. And then stereotypes are obviously based off of what's referred to sort of as a psychological prototype, which is where basically
Mhm.
that image you have in your head, if I say like the word doctor, there's that
Yeah.
sort of that old
You have a
timey
psychological
I guess
schematic.
sort of like joke where or sort of morbid riddle where there's a car crash involving a son and the father, and the father is killed, and yet when the son is dragged in for surgery, the surgeon says, "I can't operate on him. He's my son." Would
And
be
people
an
are like, that
example.
doesn't make sense. Yeah. When really the mother's the
Hmm?
surgeon. When really the mother's the
Right.
surgeon. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Okay, so
because
I
for most people, the prototype for a surgeon is a man. That's how that riddle works.
Mhm.
It's the same principle operating. It's the same principle operating pretty much, and that's why it draws from both attitudinal as well as stereotypes. So you can have a positive stereotype, and that would lead to a sort of positive implicit bias. No examples really come to mind because those kinds of positive stereotypes aren't really that interesting to study because they don't really impact anything, really.
in-group assessments. It would
Hmm?
definitely it would definitely influence in-group
Yeah.
assessments, I would think, with interpersonal relationships.
Yes,
Woody.
especially in group biases. In fact, we are all social psychologically speaking predisposed towards our particular tribe, our particular in group.
I
So,
I
like
have
I
to
know, for
actively.
example,
Well, I was going to say that I
sorry.
have to actively work over or challenge my cultural conditioning that
Yes,
has
and
been a
that's good.
problem. The way that I was raised it was extremely toxic masculinity, and so
Hmm.
it took a while to kind of get over the conditioning, the way I would view other people, the way I was trained to, and realizing that needed to be addressed and corrected.
Right, exactly, and that's
Okay.
part of what happens here. Is that if it's not something that you explicitly sort of work against, and sort of, I mean, it's almost kind of like applying a self therapy in a way. Your implicit bias will continue to sort of drive you more than your explicit bias. And
Okay.
yeah, and what was and the other point that I was making? Oh yeah, in-group biases, and also in-group biases, especially within social psychology. What we have learned from like Henry Teifel is that there's a tendency. It's called the meta contrast principle. It basically is where you will oversimplify the differences in your own group and in the other group, but you will emphasize the differences. See if I can, but you will emphasize the differences between the two groups, even though those
Right.
differences may not exist. And there's this constant process of comparison that's also made between the two groups that helps to serve so not only solidify one group's identity, but also allows for positive like comparison. So to build up sort of self-esteem. So like, and a simple case would be, oh, we're not like those groups. They're homophobic bigots, even if
Right.
they aren't necessarily homophobic bigots. But by calling them homophobic bigots, what I've done is I've now stated a way that our group is better than their group.
Right.
That's a lot of stuff, I know.
So yeah, no, I get it. I have a degree in something similar. So when I'm going to throw this out to the group because May and Jenny are. I don't think I've ever seen May be this question. so
So
it
one
sounds
of
my
my
wheelhouse.
things for allyship, and in
Yeah.
terms of
Right.
how like this also affects it, is that
Right.
an ally should also always be working to overcome their own implicit bias and to be willing to learn from our feedback and also make corrections, is what I should say.
So surely if they're doing that, Calon, they are they're still being an ally even if they make mistakes.
Yes, if they make mistake, but if they constantly, like, they don't check their implicit bias, they keep making the same mistake over and over, at that point, they're no ally. They're actually harming us more than they are helping us,
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have any arguments there.
Okay, so it sounds like the average person just, walking down the street who, considers themselves an ally, and they knows nothing about research surrounding implicit biases or biases in general, or doesn't even necessarily even understand the psychological principles that are involved or the intersocial principles that are involved in a complex topic like that. They would still be subject to them, but their intentions when acting could potentially be good. However, they may inadvertently cause some harm with good intentions. When something like that happens, I guess my question would be to everybody here, what's the best course of action? Because I've seen all kinds of different courses of action. I've seen somebody gently correct. I've seen somebody just fly into that person as though the intention was equal to the outcome, and everything in between. Do you feel that there is a best course of action, or do you think it's case by case? Like, what do you guys think in these instances?
Yeah, it'd have to be
So,
case by case, Shannon, because the way different people, well, for a start, we all react differently to everything that happens around us anyway. So how you'd react to somebody doing something would be entirely different to how I might react. So that's always going to be different anyway. And aside from that, there's different levels of things that people can do wrong that can offend other people. Like in our case, like if somebody misgenders you, some of us will go off their handle and go absolutely nuts about it, and others will quietly say, no, hang on. But even for those of us who are nice about it, if you encounter somebody who constantly misgenders, you're going to take that as an insult, even if it's not meant that way, because there has to be an intent from the other person's side to actually make an effort. And if they're not making an effort, then they're letting their biases take hold and they're not actually trying to be supportive.
Yeah, you can only accept an apology so many times.
Supportive. Yeah, right. It really is the case of that. You can, if you're going to say that you want to be nice to me, but then not be nice to me, then I'm going to assume you actually don't want to be nice to me.
Right. You just want to seem like you are, or tell yourself that you are.
Yeah.
When really you just want to ask what the fuck you want to ask.
You're not doing it for me or the community. You're doing it for yourself, and you're doing it for your other little clique who you want to look better for. You're not doing it to be an ally in that sense.
And in those instances, I think with those people, an apology was probably more placating than it was genuine, because they're continuing to redo the behavior. Okay. Yeah. So what do you think, each of you, whichever one of you would like to jump in, what do you think within the context of the community that we all exist within is the biggest form of adversity that you currently face? I want to shift the focus back from allyship, from me back to you guys.
So honestly, the biggest that I focus is that people don't recognize their implicit bias. I see a lot of rhetoric that implicitly sort of works off of the principle, for example, that trans women aren't women, for example. I've actually also received plenty of explicit transphobia as well, which gets related to when I get into some arguments with atheists. Somehow, I don't know how, but the question of theism and gender is somehow related. It's probably one of the more obvious answers to the issue of implicit and explicit bias that you can really get.
Let me jump in and just ask for clarification on that. When you say you're arguing with atheists over this issue, and I would have thought that the biggest obstacle or the biggest well, I'll just go with obstacle, what would have come from the sources of religion, like every other typical
Yes.
prejudice that we deal with.
Well, the thing
Well,
There
is
are
that
a
I mostly
lot.
hang out with a pagan
Um,
crowd, and the pagan crowd I hang out with and I'm a part of, they're not transphobic, most of them. In fact, most of them are trans. Not that that doesn't mean you can't be transphobic, because yes, you can be trans and transphobic. It happens quite a bit. But the main reason why I see this as a huge weakness is because it hurts our efforts to be able to sort of like coordinate against sort of the other threat, which is indeed the religious, particularly the evangelical and the I guess fundamentalist perspectives onto us.
Them and the
So in
turfs.
short,
Uh,
so
The
in short,
turfs.
Sorry, I had to bring that
Can
up. Turf.
So I actually want to weigh in on this a bit. Probably the most vitriolic, hateful. I think they're even worse than the ones in the States are the turfs, and they're mostly from the United Kingdom. They're just horrible towards trans people. They're funded by the Heritage Foundation and other bullshit like that, but like they are a huge source of hatred towards us. And they're from a mostly atheist. They're from probably the country with the biggest amount of atheists, and a lot of them, unfortunately, are atheists. And they are actually taking feminism, which is generally considered to be a good and positive thing, to such an extreme level of where basically anyone assigned male at birth is and always will be a man, and is therefore the evil,
The enemy.
whatever they want to say.
Yeah.
Exactly, the enemy that they have to fight. And like, I used to try to talk with them. I really did. Up until I made a really positive post, and I had to get a blockbot for them because they were really coming after me at that point. I thought they would mass flag my Twitter, so I had to get rid of them. But they're not as threatening. Like, they don't say kill all the LGBT people. A lot of them are actually lesbians, unfortunately. But they are, again, a large number of them are atheists, and they are some of
really
the worst.
cis people.
Yeah.
That's
Fortunately,
the primary issue that I see
they're
with first is the fact that they can actually have. So, like, for let's say the NIFB, they're not going to have any appeal to the atheists, none at all, because they're in the outward, far outward.
Can I add something?
That one's not subtle. There's not a subtle distinction with the
not subtle at all.
No.
But with like the turfs, the issue is that they can, especially the cis people, they can seem like the nicest people in the world and try to get into the in group, and then that creates sort of issues also within the stability, so to speak.
So you think people with
what else?
Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
Yes.
Within
So
the
what I'd like to
stability,
say,
because the more
all these inputs have all been sort of general and very much political. Not that the debate and the situation is essentially a political one, but what I think is the main cause of all this problem is the idea that has been propagated for at least more than half a century, at least, that trans people are mentally ill or mentally disabled. That is, in my opinion, the biggest cause of all these problems, and the cause of the roots of all the prejudice that is against us, and makes people don't hire us for jobs or don't take us seriously because they assume by default that we are mentally disabled because of who we are. And I think that is something that I understand to have an origin on religion. They used to do the same with gay people, not only with trans people. In fact, they used to think that gays and trans people were the same thing. We're just more flamboyant. That's what they thought was the case. And I think that is the main thing that we should really address as the main cause of our issues, as the thing that makes us not get hired, as the thing that makes us not be taken seriously on a debate, that people will simply say that we are mentally ill. Why should we listen to us? And it's the main justification that usually transphobic people use. And it's something that is changing. Something that is changing. The many organizations around the world are no longer using that definition of transgender as being a mental disorder, because it isn't. It just doesn't fit the medical description. And I think it's something that is often not addressed as often as it should, because it's the way I see it, is the main argument that transphobic people use to deny us rights, to deny us platforms, and just to take us seriously. And it shows another thing. It shows a big bias and prejudice against mental illness, because it says that if you're mentally ill, nobody should listen to you, which is, of course, nonsense.
Yeah,
I can contribute something. Sorry, I just, if you don't mind me interjecting for just 1 second, because I have something specifically to contribute to that point. So in the DSM, in the DSM-5, there's actually a preface addendum when it describes dysphoria. Dysphoria is actually doesn't take place, as far as I understand, based on my reading and research in the field, in 100% of trans people. Dysphoria is specifically described as the feelings of discomfort or disconcertment by not feeling as though you're representing as the gender that you identify it with. So dysphoria is actually that negative detrimental feeling that may need mental health treatment, because it's a negative and detrimental feeling. And because of that, because there's been such a stigma, as a preface in the DSM now, they say that this, isn't a mental health disorder in the same fashion that many other mental health disorders are. And that one of the reasons that it's maintained within the DSM is so that people who do experience it will have access to treatment because dysphoria is a real thing. It's not unilaterally applied. However, it is real when it exists in people that it's affecting. So when you say taking it out of the mental health field, I'm of two minds. One is, yeah, because people think that everybody who is transgendered is dysphoric, and that's just flat out unequivocally not the case. But for people who are, you would want to keep it in there, I would think, so that you have access to the appropriate level of mental health facilities and faculties and treatment that would be required in order to reconcile that and mitigate that and manage that for you. Does that make sense? Do you guys agree?
Yeah, so really what it's a problem with is a problem with ableism at that point as well.
Right.
This idea
that
someone should, just because you're somewhat mentally disabled, therefore we should not hire you because of said disability. Which,
and it's also
that's the most hidden of the isms.
Right, and it's an overextension. Sorry, go ahead.
So there's a bunch of things going on here. First, one of the reasons why they don't want to take it out is because there's a lot of insurance companies that might not insure trans people for like hormones and surgeries and stuff if there's not an actual diagnosis. So that's one of the arguments for leaving it in. As far as dysphoria itself goes, there is an amazing trans woman who is a PhD in biochemistry on Twitter, who has, Emmy, who has said that dysphoria is extremely subjective, and it is like different, very different for everyone. Even if it's often the same, someone could be experiencing dysphoria and technically and not even knowing it or being able to describe it in a way that would fit into the box that we have that is dysphoria, basically. And there is at times where I've questioned where whether or not I'm dysphoric or not. But every time I do, it comes along and slaps me in the face and says, "No, you are."
On.
The thing I believe is what the biology terminology that they have been using is gender incongruence. In fact, the ICD, the new ICD that should be ready in a few months, or maybe hopefully within this year or next year, it's going to reclassify it not as a matter of mental health, but as a matter of sexual health. So the thing is, that is, in my opinion, another false dichotomy that some people present, that if you don't classify it as a mental health, it's not classified as a health issue at all, and that is not true. It can be classified as a health issue, but not under the mental health umbrella if it's not a case of mental health. Now the thing is, there certainly seem to be there certainly seem to be some psychological elements associated with it, but the psychological elements could be either due to prejudice. It could be the case. It could simply be the case that you feel ugly, and that is something that doesn't affect only trans people. What is what is dysphoria, and what is just simply feeling ugly, not feeling happy with your own body? There seem to be lots of times where these two things conflate, and it's not as easy to separate them when you are actually dysphoric and when you just want to look prettier. I don't know if you guys follow ContraPoints. I think she's great. She's one of my favorite YouTubers. Her latest video about her, she did a facial feminization surgery. She talks about this stuff, and that's exactly the same questions that she has. When it's about just feeling ugly and when it's dysphoria, it's not easy sometimes to make this distinction. And feeling ugly is something that I think every human feels.
Here's again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know a lot of. Yeah.
I didn't used to feel ugly until I got old.
Age.
Didn't you go to
I have age dysphoria. I still feel like a 12-year-old.
That's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I do think that there is a very big distinction between incongruence and dysphoria, though. And there's a group of trans people out there who believe the opposite, and they're usually called true scum, and they really hate me too. Everybody.
What are true scum?
They hate me too.
I'm so sorry. I don't know that term.
Yeah.
What's true? What does that mean?
Trans exclusionaries. Trans people who think they're better than other trans people. Isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, no, they basically think that if you don't have full-on dysphoria and you're not going to have surgery, you're not really trans, so you should fuck off, is basically what they think.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, yeah. and a lot of them. Well, there's
pretty
a spectrum.
They don't understand
the worst
gender
ones.
theory.
Yeah.
Wow.
The worst ones would say that even like
affirmation surgery and you experience dysphoria, you're not trans as far as they're concerned.
Yep.
Right.
Or if you're non-binary in any way.
Holy Lord.
Yeah, I've actually had some pretty heated arguments with one a couple of times on my Twitter, who like doesn't even think you should be allowed to transition if you're over 24.
Oh, yeah,
wow.
Yeah, because you won't pass. Because it'll be
they
impossible.
Passing has to happen,
and I'm
or you're not trans. Like,
but maybe
yeah,
you may not
really
want
hates
that.
Because like
wasn't there a famous composer? Wasn't there a famous musical composer that transitioned at like in 30s or 40s?
Wendy
I'm
Carlos.
34.
Are you talking about Wendy Carlos?
There you go. Yep.
Used to be Wendy Nee Walter Carlos.
Yeah,
I mean, Lavender Lady was like in her 40s when she transitioned.
Clockwork Orange.
I love Lavender Lady. She's
She did.
fantastic.
She did.
She's
She
great.
also did a whole bunch of hooked on Bach on the Moogs. Pretty good.
Interesting.
And she's very talented.
And it also it shouldn't freaking
I'm
matter.
assuming
That's
she's
so
still alive.
arbitrary.
I don't know.
Yep, and the thing
So
is,
there's-
that I tried to get on.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Alex,
you're
go ahead.
25. You missed the window.
Yep.
That's right. You don't get to be you.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've been told I look 24, so that must count.
So you're
I
fine.
mean,
then.
even within our own community, there's a lot
Yeah.
of there's an awful lot of biases. So, I mean, all four of us are going to have different opinions on things and different understandings of things. I mean, I'm a very binary trans woman, so I actually kind of totally get the whole there's just men and women, and it's really hard for me to understand non-binary. And yeah, I'm really good friends with May, so. And I'm trying my best to understand all the time, but I don't think that she's not trans. That would just be arrogant of me to be like that. But I do find it hard to understand because I'm so binary in my thinking.
Interesting.
I think
Yeah,
one thing regarding that is that I'm kind of in the middle of this debate. I am someone, I like science, I like biology. I'm not a biologist, but I read a lot about it, and especially regarding to sex and gender. What I see sometimes in the trans community is people simply denying some facts of nature that are self-evident, like sexual dimorphism. That is a self-evident phenomenon. It's not something that you can deny. Sexual dimorphism is a thing. Now, it doesn't mean that because there is sexual dimorphism, that gender binarism is the only interpretation of the phenomenon of sexual dimorphism. I believe that the best way to interpret the phenomenon is through a spectrum. And there will be people that fall on both sides of the spectrum, and there will be people that fall on the middle of the spectrum. But even if you acknowledge a spectrum, you are acknowledging gender sexual dimorphism. You are acknowledging that there will be people that will be more masculine. There will be males that will be more masculine than other males. There will be females that will be more feminine than other females. You are acknowledging that there are variety and that there are certain characteristics that are typically female that you are going to call that person on, that you're going to put that person on the female side of the spectrum. So I think there is a middle ground there, and that's what the way I look at it, where you don't have to deny this, because one problem that I see among some activists is denying the obvious self-evident fact that sexual dimorphism exists. You don't have to deny that fact, and at the same time you can acknowledge that gender and sex works in a spectral way, same way that sexuality works in a spectral way. You can be 100% hetero, but you could be 20% hetero and 80% gay, or you could just, I don't know, qualify as a pansexual, or.
I mean, to me,
How does the
it's to me, it's all just using different language to describe yourself. So I call myself a non-binary trans one because when I'm speaking with other especially with binary trans people, I am just so entirely different from all of the people who I've ever spoken with. There are things that I'm okay with that most binary trans women would not be okay with. I won't necessarily get into that here because that would keep us all night. But really, it's just using different language that aren't strictly male or female or man or woman or however you want to say it to describe ourselves.
Part of the problem is people conflate biological sex. Sorry?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I heard Calon Calon's mic is so soft and she's so soft spoken. I thought I heard you trying to get in earlier. Did you have something to say there that you didn't get heard? Can you hear me? We can't hear you.
Nothing, except I think the point should also be emphasized that gender and sex really have nothing to do with each other.
This is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was where I was going to next. Part of the
They,
problem
they
comes
do
from
have
people
one to do with one
conflating-
another. Absolutely, they do. They are related. To say they are unrelated is another big problem within the community.
No, they are unrelated.
Yeah,
Because that's what the science shows us. The social science indicates
Gender,
Just
that
because
gender is
social science
gender
is
is something
wrong.
is performative and sex is not.
Guys.
just
Social science is
because
wrong.
no. Let me explain this the easiest way I can. Just because the sex and gender of 98 roughly % of people are congruent doesn't mean that it's the same thing.
It's not the same
And
thing.
I'm not
absolutely.
following a
They are
social.
related.
I'm
Right.
not
In fact, they
following a
have nothing to do with
social,
each other, really. They
science
just
or
happen to
anything.
be
They
highly
do have a lot
correlated
to do
because
with
that's what society has driven it to be.
Yeah.
They
Well,
have
as I was
absolutely
saying,
one
part
to
of the
do with
problem is
another.
people.
Gender-
The traits that we
conflict,
classify as
conflict,
feminine
Oh my God.
and masculine
Oh,
are
yeah.
fairly.
They are not arbitrary. They're
Okay,
We
not
are
we'll
so
let,
good
we'll
at
let,
talking over
we'll
the
let
top of
Caleb
each
finish
other.
his thought, and then I'm gonna have to start calling upon people because it's getting intense. It's difficult
Yeah, if
to
I
hear
could
you
if I
guys.
could say one other thing, Shannon,
Aaron,
you
and then
pointed
I'll
out
go
that Calon's microphone was very soft,
Yeah.
and it's now blowing my doors. So
Is it really?
can we find him?
Oh, it's not mine.
Yeah,
I actually
mine
boosted
too
it
much?
a little bit. Maybe I boosted it a bit too much.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. There you go. All right. So, Calon, go ahead. Just lay out your case for why they're distinct, and then we'll go to Sarah, and then we'll go to the other two, or we'll just see what happens. I have a feeling I'm going to lose control almost immediately. So go ahead.
I'll give you a jump scare.
Okay, so gender and sex are, while they're highly correlated, they are not at all the same thing. You could have, theoretically, you could have a person who presents entirely male, or what we call male, or is a man, but be a woman in terms of gender. The two are not the same. In fact, they're unrelated because they're both are technically social constructs, but sex is a social construct based on biology, or based off what society deems certain traits to be. Like breasts are associated with this idea of female. Certain chromosomes get associated with this idea of female, and so on and so on. Whereas in reality, words can mean whatever you want them to mean. We could have just as easily called them male. Gender, on the other hand, is more about what we label what we do. It is a performative act that is also based off of various societal roles, various dispositions, as well as various other things. The two get correlated because society associates particular bodies with particular actions, such as giving childbirth, caring for the children, all this other stuff that is a result of patriarchy. But in the end, they need not be. In fact, they aren't, if this is making sense. You can see this in the paper, Doing Gender by Gender and Society, from that journal.
I mean, a lot of gender is instinctual, for the most part.
Instinctual in what
and
way?
then there are some outliers. A lot of it.
Instinctual. Instinctual in what way? Because we're talking about socialization as well. People are socialized into gender roles, and socialization gets to a point where you do it without even realizing it.
Can I respond to
If
that?
you took me out into the
Let me
woods
answer now.
when I was a child, before I learned any of this, I would still be a non-binary trans woman. I just wouldn't have the language to describe it.
You would still be
you can't-
dysphoric, but you would not necessarily be non-binary trans because you wouldn't know what binary or even what gender is. You
I was
haven't been
still
socialized
non-binary,
into that role yet.
but a lot of what makes me would still be the same. Like, you can say that it's social. You can't say that it's entirely socialization. Like,
Sure,
humans are not tabula rasa. Oh, you can, but you wouldn't be right. Humans are not tabula rasa. We have some pre-programmed stuff in us, just like every other animal in the world.
What pre-programmed instincts do we have that is relevant to this current discussion?
For gender not being entirely a social construct.
No, gender is
let's-
entirely a social construct. This is demonstrated by it being a
No, it's
performative
not.
aspect that people are
Can
socialized into.
I
Okay, I'm gonna let
Sarah
Sarah.
respond to
Sarah's
that?
dying.
Socialization isn't required.
thank you.
So let's
I
take a trait that's. Go ahead.
Can I get?
I'm actually
I
going to
told
ask,
Sarah. Sorry, May. Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm actually
ahead.
going to ask Aron Ra to help me with this one because I believe Aron Ra can help me with this one because of his
How can I
expertise in
help this?
zoology. Oh, you have an expertise in zoology, Aron, and I think that the analogy here can apply. So the idea that Calon is putting out is that everything is arbitrary, that it's all social constructs that have no basis in observable reality. It's all
No,
arbitrary.
that's
We
not
just
what I'm
pick it up.
saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that it has no basis in reality. I'm saying that it's arbitrary. Arbitrary does not necessarily mean unimportant or no basis in reality.
If it's
have to pick
arbitrary,
somewhere.
it's because if it's arbitrary, that means it has no basis on observable reality. It's simply we just randomly.
A meter stick is arbitrary. We decide that as.
Am I allowed to speak it? Am I allowed to speak?
Let me say.
Yes.
Let me counter. Because first of all,
if it is no, I let you speak. Now it's my turn to speak. Thank you. If it is arbitrary, that means we can just randomly choose whatever we like, and that is not the case, and that's why I'm making, an analogy with zoology. So it is typification. Typification is something that we do according to observable patterns in nature. For example, what we do, we might say that zoology is a construct, and it's not incorrect to say that it is a construct. However, the construct is based on observable patterns that we see in animals, in different animals that we observe in nature. So what we see is objects. Each individual animal has its own particular characteristics, and we identify similar characteristics that are recurring. And that's how we create the typification in zoology, that we create different classes, that we create different species, or that we make all these classifications. They are based on observable patterns. Is that correct, Aron? Am I interpreting it correctly? That's how zoology works. Isn't that?
Okay,
isn't that how it is?
It is fair to call it
arbitrary.
It is not arbitrary because you are actually
making
it's
still arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary because we are observing recurring patterns in nature. This is not arbitrary,
which we've
because
arbitrated on.
Let's just say that nature is completely arbitrary.
What makes it arbitrary? What makes it arbitrary? Let's just make sure we're using the same definition.
If you are using recurring patterns in nature, it's not arbitrary. It's recurring patterns in nature.
If it's objectively verifiable, if you're looking at data that is objectively verifiable regardless of anyone's opinion, then I would say there's a way to prove people wrong or right and given certain points in zoology.
Yes.
Then I would call that objective. I wouldn't say that it was arbitrary.
I may be able to help Calon
here.
So when she's saying arbitrary, I think she means like there's clearly defined groups, and you can categorize within zoology. Let's say you can categorize within those groups because there's criteria, and you utilize those criteria in order to make that categorization. When Calon is saying that it's arbitrary, it's because somebody had to come up with that. Somebody had to come up with that form of categorization. They could have come up with a different form of categorization, and that the conglomeration of that group could have been in a different configuration. The configuration of that group is entirely determined. But just one second, the configuration. I'm just playing devil's. I'm just trying to bridge the gap, and I think that may be what Calon means by arbitrary.
But I know what Aron is.
Objective individuals.
Yeah.
Make the determinations as to what group configurations are going to be, and thus they're arbitrary because we're the ones making the determinations for those groups, and we could determine differently.
It's not arbitrary though.
Yeah,
we can try to categorize things.
When you want to measure stuff, you refer to it an international standard. The standard could have been different. We chose, say, what is it for like a kilogram, like Is it platinum?
But it
No,
isn't because
platinum?
they are
It's been too
based
long
on
since I've taken
observable,
physics.
observable
But these
information.
things,
I just
these
want to say
things which we
something.
pick out, we could
It's
have picked
Calon.
differently. You can use different units to express various different information.
Yes,
That's
but
all nice and good, but that doesn't
you
mean
can
they're
use
not
different. You can
arbitrary.
use
They're
different
arbitrary, but we
units.
have arbitrated them. You can arbitrate arbitrary.
You can use different units,
But
but
Calon, this is kind of
the
non
physical
sequitur
properties are
because
going to be the same. Just the
Yeah, 'cause
units
the
are going to
outcomes are
change, but
always
the
gonna be-
physical
It's the
properties are going
pointless
to be the
You have to
same.
provide evidence
thing
that
with
the humans would
zoology.
be the same.
Same thing.
Gender
Same
is a
thing with
social
zoology.
construct.
Same thing with sex.
I don't.
Same thing with
Calon,
sex.
by
I
your
don't
Same
see the
thing with
disconnect
sex
here.
categorization. What's happening? We are saying, for example, that beard, facial hair is a typically male characteristic. It doesn't mean that females cannot have facial hair, but it's typically male. Males have typically
Yeah, and that's arbitrary.
upper
Decided.
that has nothing
it's
to do
not
with gender.
arbitrary because it's not arbitrary because it's from observable patterns in nature. That's not arbitrary.
No,
It's based on
no, that's
observation.
not how.
It's based
the
on
group
observation
itself,
of
what we
reality.
consider male
Same
characteristics
thing
is
with
arbitrary. I could
gender.
just
for
easily
example,
call them
upper body
female
strength.
and define a
Males
female in
have
such a way that you have
50%
all
more upper
these, you have
body
a
strength
you have
than
all that other
females.
stuff. And
Calon,
That
this
is
is a
based
red
on
herring.
Everyone's talking
Hey,
at the same
hey,
time,
hey,
and I'm having an
observable
aneurysm.
reality.
Hey,
It's not
ladies.
random.
This is
Hey,
not productive.
hey,
This is
not
it. I'm
random.
having. Can we? Okay, let's.
Ladies.
Whoo.
Gotta be
Okay,
one at a
everybody take a
time.
drink. I'll take a
Is-
drink.
The people on the show can literally not distinguish anything
Nobody-
you are saying. Nobody
knows what
understood a
anybody-
single thing you just said because you were talking over. each
Okay, so
Okay.
I'm gonna go. Okay, so let's let May and Jenny talk for a second.
Okay.
What's your opinion on these
I told you
changes
we'd have a
happening?
dumpster fire.
So
Welcome to the non-sequitur.
arguing that this is a social construct in the way that Calon is really pointless, because using this definition of social construct, literally everything is a social construct, including the shape of the Earth. It's a pointless discussion to go down, because
Yeah, I agree.
it's a pointless discussion to go down, because everything is a social construct if it's some knowledge that we have. What I am saying is that what I would like to ask Calon is that, do you believe that literally everything we do that has to do with our actions, our performative actions, is 100% socialized, or do you accept that there is some pre-programmed natural instincts that we would have even if we were not socialized, that would be similar, maybe not necessarily exactly the same, but would be similar to someone who was socialized in one way or another?
Okay, first of all, your first point, you say there's no utility in calling everything a social structure, yet you interact with the world via a social structure called language.
There's
That's
no point in
social
arguing
structure.
that.
That is predetermined
no
and that
point
is
in arguing
socialized
that.
into you. When
That's
I say
not the
a social
subject.
structure, I'm referring to endurable patterns with how we interact with the world that are given to us by society.
Epistemology.
That is what we refer to as a process of socialization.
And
Now,
if okay,
So it
well, I'll
sounds
the
ask
current science, let me speak.
Like Colin.
The
That's
current
it.
science says that gender is performative and that it is, for the best of our knowledge, socialized. You are not inherently taught. You do not inherently have gender. The closest thing you can have that we can delineate and yes, we can objectively determine stuff, even if it's by an arbitrary standard. We arbitrate the standard like we do in physics. In physics, we take the meter and we determine that we're going to measure it by light speed. That's arbitrary, but that's fine because we arbitrated it and we all agree objectively to call this unit of distance this. And that is why it is useful and reflects natural patterns.
Meters
So,
have
Calon,
bases
are
in
you
reality.
suggesting that
Meter is not an arbitrary value. It has bases in
Let
reality.
Jenny.
Okay, I could have
Let Jenny
decided
go
that the
first.
meter is.
I got to throw in one more thing. I probably shouldn't, but I got to throw in one more thing.
Don't do it,
If it's
Aaron.
arbitrary, it means it's up to human whim. All right. So we can either classify things by derived synapomorphies, or we can classify things by what color they are. But if I classify living organisms by what color they are, that's not going to work. I'm not going to be able to build a tree out of that. There's nothing that will make sense. So my arbitrary decision can be proven wrong by classification by other methods, and so that it is not arbitrary because it's not up to human whim.
Okay, but
Exactly.
Well, that
Exactly.
again, off subject.
It's a matter of
Again, off
epistemology.
subject.
It's not a matter of politics. It's a matter of epistemologies. The problem, I think, with social sciences is put everything in the idea of politics. It's a matter of epistemology and not politics. It's a different discussion.
No,
trying to get
there's no
answer to
issue
a
here with
specific-
the social sciences has been clear and consistent on this.
And it's
Gender
been
is
wrong then.
performative.
It's
Answer to a
consistently
specific
wrong.
question. So can I ask my question again?
And is
So,
social science even
Go ahead,
useful?
May. Go ahead, May.
I'll ask I don't care about social science. I just want an answer to my question. If a human was, say, abandoned or something from a young age and was not socialized, would the human have
Right.
Would the human have a gender? And we're going to assume that this is a cis human of whatever gender. So identifies with the parts.
You can't
that has
presume that.
no dysphoria, anything like that. Would this human?
You can't know that because
Would or
human
would
hasn't been socialized. This has literally happened where children were raised in the woods and they come back and they behave just like any other natural animal.
Yes. Okay. So
This
let's
has
do it this
happened
way.
in the real
Do
world.
animals have gender? Do animals have gender? Let's take
I'm not going to speculate on
Let's
animals
take
because I'm
lions.
concerned
Do
with
it-
humans.
yes. Do lions have gender? Is the gender of a
The lions
biologically
have
male
sex.
lion different
As far
from
as I don't know, can you demonstrate AU social behavior of lions?
well, they are social animals.
Yes, well, at least you can in
But are they
terms of
EU
tendencies.
social animals? There's a difference.
Yeah. And also aesthetic.
Yeah, lions do have behaviors that are particular
That's-
to the males and behaviors that are particular to the females, and they are a
Yes,
social
our behaviors
group.
are largely. Sorry.
Exactly.
Sorry, Aaron.
Males are
Sorry.
generally solitary after a certain age, and females are not solitary. They
Okay,
form
good. But I'm
prides.
talking about humans.
Yeah,
don't
they
really-
are,
Okay,
our
well, my
behaviors
point-
are largely
my
influenced by
point-
hormones.
Have you ever
They're
seen a
largely influenced
transgender
by
lion?
hormones.
My
Yeah,
I've
intersex
seen gay lions,
is
but I don't.
that- hang on a
Yeah.
sec.
Now,
My
intersex
point
Is there a
is
good
that
lesbian
not
lions
everything
and gay
is
lions?
is
And
socialized. My point is
They
that
are
not
intersex
everything is
lions.
socialized. Like
How would we identify a
I would
transgender
still want to
lion?
be-
That's my
Okay,
point.
let's
You
not-
can't,
that is the gender
Yeah, you
thing,
wouldn't
but
be
you
able
can
to.
identify intersex lions.
because they don't
Intersex
have
lions
that
can
level
be
of
identified.
socialization.
They exist.
It's wanting
Okay, I have
Intersex
to be
lions
part of
exist. That is
We're
that is
losing
an observable
track
fact of nature.
right now, and I have a question actually, and I'm not sure if it's going to be productive or if it's or not, but it seems as though, like, from a psychological neuroscience perspective and from a socialization perspective, there's certain traits that we stereotypically affiliate with females and certain traits that we stereotypically affiliate with males, and most everybody falls on a spectrum in between. Like, if you ask somebody, they're going to have a biased schematic of, pink girl, long hair girl, makeup girl, larger frame boy, and potentially more aggressive boy. Like, people are going to have those predetermined schematics. Now the question ultimately is, did we construct those schematics that give us the stereotypical archetype of each end of this spectrum because they manifested naturally as a result of innate biological imperatives at their extreme existing when they're instantiated in that fashion, or because of the society that we exist within, were those manifestations manifested as an archetype because we socialize our children that if they wish to be the penultimate version of their gender archetype. This is what they should exist as, and thus that's something that they strive for. When ultimately,
answer is clearly
everybody-
socialization.
I'm just saying that it's not all learned behavior. Some of it's instinctual. There is socialization. It is a thing, but
Let's approach
but
it from
you
this way.
can't
If
just
we-
say that it's
if-
all socialization. You can't just say it's all learned behavior, because there has to be a
Can I
base.
speak without
and until you
interruption?
demonstrate otherwise.
Okay,
Can I
let's
speak
let
without
Sarah
I'd
talk
like
for
you
a
to
sec.
I would like you to demonstrate that it is, because
May,
I don't
let's-
think
okay,
you
let's
can.
gender
do it.
and doing gender and gender in society. It's been cited
Okay.
over 1,200 times, so there are plenty of articles for you to go through.
We need an air horn.
Can I speak? Can I say something?
Sarah, you have the floor for at least
Okay.
2 to 5 minutes, please. Guys, just let
Okay,
Sarah.
I'll try to be
Go
brief,
ahead.
and please let me speak. So the whole thing about being arbitrary, well, typification isn't, in this case of sex, as I was trying to make before the analogy with zoology, isn't it? Can I please
Calon,
speak?
let Sarah speak.
Thank you.
Calon, please let Sarah speak for a
Yes.
moment
I,
uninterrupted.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
know what she means by typification. There are many. I use the sociological definition,
Typification
which is
as
a
a,
bit different.
as a
So what is it?
classification of life. Okay, let me speak, please. Typification as a classification of life is the classification that we do of living organisms, similar to what we do in zoology, is what we do in terms of sex. We observe living creatures, and we're going to classify them as certain categories according to observable patterns. That is how we come up with the idea of sex. Of course, it is constructed by language and other symbols that we use to construct our ideas, but it doesn't mean that they are random and arbitrary. They are based on careful observation of recurring patterns in reality, similar to what we do in zoology. Now we could come up with, as Aron pointed out, we could come up with deciding to classify sex according to hair color. We could have decided to do that and say that people with brown hair are males and people with blonde hair are females, but that would be completely pointless and wouldn't help us organizing society. You wouldn't help us to predict what gender, social role, or whatever behavior someone would have according to their hair color, because that is not a good indicator. It's not a good way to typify. We create a typification according to recurring patterns that allow us to organize society and predict how people behave, predict how people are going to look like according to these observable recurring patterns. So, for example, when we decided to typify people who have, for example, certain body frame as female and certain body frame as male, that allow us to make predictions about that person's behavior, make predictions about that person's other characteristics of someone's characteristics. Now, this comes from observing recurring patterns on reality. It's not simply at whim and arbitrary. It's not just random. That is a difference between.
I don't think you understand what I mean by arbitrary. You can have something be arbitrary and have it be useful. Just because I say the word arbitrary.
But then I think arbitrary becomes a pointless.
It's just saying that we've decided.
It's misleading.
Yes, but your argument
as something.
But then your whole argument that is all constructed and random falls apart.
It doesn't affect my
argument. It just becomes a matter.
My argument
does completely affect the argument.
It
becomes a matter. It becomes a discussion of semantics and no more a discussion of epistemology.
I think it's more so a discussion of how we organize the group.
I'm telling you what the science says.
I think it's more so an argument on how the groups are organized, like what determinations we make in order to assign those classifications. I understand that in order for the classifications to make any sense and to be useful, they need to be consistent. So because they're consistent, we can consistently see behavioral manifestations, let's say, and we can consistently see, biological manifestations of body type. And there's an interplay between the two, and it's significantly more complex than just saying, your body type is this or you behave in this way, because we see inconsistencies relatively frequently between the two. And the spectrum is so broad that you could I manifest pretty masculine in most of my behavioral manifestations. However, I manifest visually, I think I'm pretty feminine. I don't know, mostly feminine. But when I'm articulating, and also when I'm engaging in behaviors, like I'm an athlete, for example, those are things that would be considered stereotypically masculine behaviors. However, spectrum shifts as society shifts. If it was 100 years ago when I was an athlete, I wouldn't be viewed the same way. It wouldn't be allowed to be incorporated into my feminine identity as it is now, because there's been a shift in perspective of society, and thus it's allowed, or not allowed, but more accepted as an incorporation in a feminine identity presentation, which incorporates not only my physical manifestation but my behavioral manifestation. So the groups are arbitrary in the manner that they can shift over time. What's considered feminine now may not have been considered feminine many years ago, and certainly may not be considered what is feminine in an entirely different society, and in that society even again 100 years ago. And thus those designations must be arbitrary, because if they weren't, then they would be static over time. Am I misunderstanding that?
When it
No,
comes
you
to
got it.
gender,
That's pretty much my whole point.
absolutely, there is a lot more variety going on, and it's a lot.
Right.
Gender. The distinction that I make is that sex is a classification of biology. Gender is a classification of. It's a social classification. As social classifications, they are of course much more mutable, much more varied, and includes a lot of other things besides physical characteristics and behavior characteristics that come simply from difference in hormones, because hormones make a huge impact in our life. But the thing is, this distinction between sexual characteristics, that is a difference in hormones. This is something I felt from cross-sex hormone therapy. Hormones changed my behavior, even change how I think, and this, of course, this sort of difference cannot be simply ignored and say that it's all, random, arbitrary. There are different physical characteristics between the sexes, and it comes largely from physical properties of our bodies.
Do you think that they're intrinsically linked to gender, though? Because
I think they inform gender. They inform gender.
I think it's fascinating that hormones. I think it's fascinating that hormones can change your behavior, and that there's so much that is fluid about who. I mean, you can start taking hormones and like change the shape of your body, just modifying that chemically. But where I get lost is how you can change your basic structure from having been built out of dirt to having been built out of a rib.
Thanks, Aron. You're right.
So there's a brilliant meme for that.
So I'm not.
That was. You guys scared me for a minute, because that was like a good 10 seconds of absolute silence before anybody liked it.
It's a lag, Aron. It's a lag. I laughed immediately as soon as I heard it. Go ahead, May. I know you had your hand up. You've been very patient, and I appreciate you being patient, so we're not all yelling at the same time. Go ahead, May.
I would say that there is a biological basis to gender, and that things like gender identity and gender, mostly gender identity anyways, and a lot of the behavioral stuff that comes from gender is based in basically already pre-programmed in our brains from birth, instinctual stuff. And then there is another layer on top of that, where society can heavily influence things like gender expression and presentation and other actions and gender roles, and all of that. There are a few gender roles that you would easily be able to say are instinctual, like females being very nurturing to children, and the men go out hunting. While there are exceptions, that is generally what you would see when you would look at the human race as a whole. And I also want to address what Aron
What's the
said
citation for that?
about. I'll go find one later. I'd like to see you really argue against that.
Are you against that mothers aren't caring for their children? I mean, have you heard of Spartan mothers?
I said it's a generalization, not a. No. I said that it's. I did not say. I said there are exceptions, Calon. You just acted like I said it's an entire rule that literally every single male or every single female
if it's
acts
innate,
in these ways, and I said,
but it's not innate.
Well,
it's
perhaps humans are. No, it's really not, because we can see the same. No, we can see the same behavior in other animals. We can see the same behavior in other mammals that are either close to us or even far from us.
Other animals. We're talking about humans.
Science denialism is crazy. Yeah.
But Calon,
then I have a question.
It's
okay. Let's not degrade.
If you were a biologist. If you were a biologist, you would make a prediction that all mammals, or at least most mammals, would have a specific trait, like the males being the strong hunters and going out and getting the food and stuff, and the females of. I will go back to using lions because they are an excellent. They are an excellent.
We can also go to using alligators where they'll eat their young.
I said mammals. I specifically.
I have a question. I have a question that I think
we can see similar actions to what I just explained happen in humans to happening in other mammals. There are exceptions like spotted hyenas, but that can actually be explained by female spotted hyenas having extremely high testosterone levels, and thus would be are heavily masculinized from birth.
What about polar bears? Don't polar bears eat their young?
We don't need to go through every single
zoology,
species, guys.
This is sociology, not zoology.
Polar bears are.
The contention was.
We can.
The contention was whether or not.
We're getting way off track. Aron, go ahead. Ask your question.
The contention was whether it's innate, right? Whether gender is innate.
At least I believe it's not entirely learned.
Okay, so to determine that, I mean, we were just talking. Now, Sarah was just pointing out how the introduction of new hormones can change your behavior and all that. So, do we all agree that children can realize that they are, if they don't realize that they have a gender dysphoria, or they don't realize that that they more identify with with the typically opposing gender? Do we accept that children can realize that they are gay even before they go through puberty, even before they start getting introduced to to the pubescent hormones? So they might realize that they were gay at 8 years old. Do we agree? The group agreed that this can happen?
I agree
that
it
happens even as young as 4.
But I don't agree that they necessarily label it as gay.
I think it's possible. I think it's possible, and they might have some behaviors that are more typically feminine that could qualify as being
would
gay.
That determine?
I don't know.
Would that determine whether aspects of
necessarily?
Okay.
There are aspects of neuroscience though that would be important to look at. So if you look so there's standardization between the construction of cortices for the average male and the average female. So there's 2 different types of neuronal structures in the brain. One is white matter and one is gray matter. White matter is myelin. Myelin is the sheath that goes around your nerve, your neuronal pathways, like your axons, that essentially work as insulation. And then the gray matter would be more so the neurons and all of the stuff in between. Men tend to have a bit more gray matter, and they tend to be a little bit more, I can't remember if it's right or left lobe centric in the concentrations of some of their gray matter, and women tend to have a little bit more white matter. And by volume, male brains actually tend to be just slightly larger, but a lot of that has to do with them having to support larger gaits and having to have larger motor cortices in their prefrontal cortex. They've done pretty extensive studies, and it's a relatively new field, but what they've found is that in neuroscience, the construction and the constitution of the brain of somebody who was assigned male at birth but identifies as female is actually more in line with the physical construction of the average brain of a cis woman. So there is a biological component that should at least, I think, be acknowledged as a factor. Because
right, but the question would then be
from
Yes,
my
whether the
absolutely.
component is a
perspective, I'm a
result of
nerd who thinks
socialization
we are
or
our
whether
brains.
it's some sort of innate, I don't know, like
Why
time bomb
can't it be
sort of
both
thing.
though? Like why can't it be an interaction of both? Why, like, if somebody had attempted, I believe this, and this is anecdotal, but I feel as though if somebody had attempted to socialize me as a typified male, there's certain aspects of that I probably would have identified that as I was, I was pretty rough and tumble, and I was an athlete, and I like to swear a whole fucking lot. So, I would have gone with those things, but I don't think my physical manifestation, like how I present, I don't believe that anybody would have been able to convince me through socialization techniques that that's how I would want to present. And if they did, I think that would have elicited a dysphoria in me. I would have been an incongruence with how I've been convinced to manifest or socialized to manifest and present myself, and how I actually want to and personally identify. And I think that maps on and is consistently, it has a pretty consistent correlate with the experience of most trans people, because they have been socialized to be the gender that they're assigned at birth, but they experience an inconsistency with the presentation that they're socialized towards and the presentation that they innately have. So if it was entirely social, that inconsistency wouldn't necessarily exist if there wasn't some sort of innate component, because that innate component is what causes the internal dissonance that would drive you towards manifesting in a way that's incongruent with how you were in fact socialized.
I also want to bring up, you just reminded me of
I think the question would then be like, so if you were somehow raised like a boy, socialized like a boy, the question of whether you would feel dysphoric and whatnot would, I guess, also depend on body modification as well, because dysphoria itself,
I think so, because I think that
is a biosocial phenomena, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that is an interaction
I
between sociology and
would
biology.
actually like to bring up an example of this.
Go ahead, May. Sorry. Yeah, I'm talking.
Sorry, I want to bring up an
actual
sorry. Example of this. No, that's not a problem. This is a semi well-known case where a boy named his name eventually became David Reimer. He was subject to a botched circumcision that completely made his penis unusable, and a doctor who was very unethical put him through an experiment where he was forced to transition from birth, and he experienced, from what I understand, he experienced a lot of dysphoria, and it eventually led him to commit suicide. So we actually have a case of this where someone who was born as a cis male was forcibly transitioned, and it was very bad for him.
The case of Reimer, the case of David Reimer completely destroys the idea that you can manipulate and force someone into changing their gender. I think the case of David Reimer is very good in many things. It's good to show that gender is not simply an arbitrary construct, that you can just simply change how people force people
into
adopt. If it's not an
arbitrary construct, then why do we see such variation?
Let me finish. Let me talk. You cannot simply force someone into adopting certain gender roles and certain gender behaviors, and they would simply accept that. No, in the case of David Reimer, even after being literally brainwashed by John Money, the doctor that brainwashed him and manipulated him into transitioning, even after being brainwashed by this unethical doctor, David Reimer eventually changed into a male, because that's how his brain structure originally was. It's something that seems to be related to how our physical bodies develop naturally. Yeah, and the example that Shannon brought up before, and there are many studies that confirm that trans people do have a different brain structure. That's what makes us want to transition in the first place. It seems to be some biological factors that are not socially construct. They are genetic, or at least they come from nature. They are not simply arbitrary or whatever it is. And the case of David Reimer also shows that people who keep saying that, we are making our children and people transition by I don't know, by gay propaganda or whatever, it's all bullshit too. Because people don't transition because of propaganda. The case of David Reimer shows that.
Oh no!
Yeah, and I just want to say that, like, yeah, no, I mean, I just want to say that, like, this sort of really does disprove gender being an entirely learned thing. If you have someone who is forced to be transitioned and really was never the gender that they were socialized to be. So, like, I wouldn't actually really say I was socialized to be any gender. I turned out to be both. Right? And actually, I will want to ask you, I will want to ask you probably on our show, but, like, what happened to me? So that'll be an interesting subject.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to be on your guys' podcast on Sunday. Yay.
Yeah. Awesome. So
Go
yeah,
ahead. We're
that's
encroaching
really,
the end of time, so we're going to have to wrap up soon. So I'll give everybody an opportunity to talk over each other for a few more minutes.
We did kind of derail this. But yeah,
Shannon,
I just wanted to say that completely. Oh. That this kind of completely just overrun. Like,
go ahead,
it proves that gender is not a entirely learned construct, or whatever you want to call it. There is definitely biology involved.
All right, before we get to super chats, I'm going to allow Calon, because I feel as though it's several against Calon here for a moment. Go ahead and get your final response out, and then we're going to read super chats, and then we're all going to hug and high five and rainbows and stuff. So go ahead, Calon.
So I never deny that there was biology involved. The initial construct setting could have, we know there's some evidence with neuroplasticity that indeed environment can't affect biology, and to say it isn't would be naive. The question is to what is necessarily to what degree. You can still have these behaviors be learned and still have a biological impact on the brain. And perhaps that's a further area for study, or something that I need to do more research into. But that does not, having a biological basis does not necessarily refute what I said about it being a social construct. We are born into society. We don't just sort of choose to enter it. We're born and then we're socialized, and our brains are sort of molded into what roles we don't even think about, stuff we don't even think about, how we act and whatnot is sort of programmed into us in terms of how to respond. Otherwise, you wouldn't even really have an ability to use language.
Okay.
And that's
so
pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do have a couple of issues. My first one is, my position is that gender is not 100%. It is not 100% learned. There is some instinctual, and then there's a lot of learned stuff on top of it. My second issue, Calon, is that when I brought up the fact that, let's say, there are similar behavioral things that are the same between canines, between rodents, between bats, between felines, between a very wide number of different mammal species. Aron's probably face palming because I'm using terrible terminology here, and even other primates. But the second that it goes to our specific species of primate, you go and you say, I don't care about any of that. I only care about our specific type of primate. And that is kind of bad science because you're ignoring everything other than what you want to look at. So if there is a common thing among all of the or the majority of the mammals, then you can't just discount that and say, but I only want to look at humans, because like we are an evolved species. We didn't just pop into existence and then have the other gender pulled out as a rib. So you really do need to look at that. And one of my biggest problems with social sciences is that you can go into a lot of things and just rip apart the methodology of it. Like you gave me an article the other day, and I ripped apart the methodology of it just by the fact of how it was done. So you really have to look at the bigger picture, not just focus on one thing.
Okay. I know everybody still wants to talk. Everybody wants to talk. I know, but we're gonna have to restart the chats and come to the end of the stream. I'm sorry. Good. I don't think I've ever shut the fuck up this much. Maybe once or twice. Let's all be proud.
I told you it'd take you a while to get going.
So, Dave, I can't access the non-sequitur super chat, so I'm going to have to get you to do that. Did you want me to read mine first, or can you see the non-sec ones?
I can see the non-sec one, and I actually only have one, so I'll just get it out of the way.
Okay, you go, then I'll go.
It's literally got nothing to do with the show. It's from Uhan Roderick, super chat. Get well, Kyle. Another self-promotion. Very good podcast.com /Aron Ra podcast. I'll be adding a decent amount of episodes this weekend. At this point, I'm still typing because I still have characters left in the message. So I'm sure Aron Ra appreciates that, Uhan.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's cute. All right, so I have a couple. Thanks, guys. You guys are all awesome. I appreciate you guys supporting the channel. It's really cool. So from Elisa Marie. Hi, Elisa Marie. Oh, I love her. Shannon Q verbalizes these topics so articulately. Love Sarah, too. You got a fan, Sarah. From Lucifer, thank you. Because you have so much patience. I don't really. I would have talked over people way less.
Internally,
you feel like I do. Thanks for making it seem like I do. I smile, so it looks like I have patience, but mostly I'm like, let's talk now. So, Brutus Magnuson, allyship makes me feel like a protective big bro. Wellington,
I like that.
Wellington, and Wellington Smith says, I'm so glad to have been here to listen and learn, and we're very glad that you came, Wellington. I always love having you here. Wellington's one of my, he's been with me since the beginning. Mark Titus, thanks for this chat. I hope we get more allies. Thank you for being here, Mark. I appreciate it. And from Min, Aron is an awesome co-host. So calm and different. Thank you, everybody, for the super chats. I appreciate it. Thank you for supporting the channel. It's awesome. Hopefully, we get Kyle back at some time soon. And I miss Kyle a little bit. Don't tell him I missed him a lot, though. The cat is already this big. And I want to say thanks to Aron. Aron's channel link is in my description. So please go sub to Aron. Aron's pretty awesome. He's a good friend, and he's a good hugger too. Just in case anybody's wondering, he gives good hugs.
Aron's great.
And thank you. Everybody's channel links are in the description. Does anybody have any final words that aren't going to descend into chaos?
Jenny and I were planning on doing. I just want to say, Jenny and I were planning on doing an after show on our channel. If anyone's interested, you can check us out on Nuanced Nonsense.
Yeah, and
if anyone wants to come on, we would be willing to have anyone, especially in here, on as well.
Yeah, I'm going to challenge God. Yeah, I'm going to challenge God in about half an hour. So if you want to tune in my channel and see if God is going to turn up and prove that He exists, you are welcome.
I'm curious to see that. Sadly, I have an obligation to go see Godzilla, but I would really like to see that.
Well, Godzilla, you're probably more likely to see Godzilla than God. Absolutely.
Fair. Totally fair.
Yeah, at least Aaron gets to see a God tonight.
All right, everybody on Non-Sec as well. Thank you for joining us. I didn't forget you guys. Love you. And everybody have a good night. Thank you for being here. This was a great conversation.
Actually,
hey guys.
I'm going to get these last 3 super chats in.
See you, everyone.
You got 2, and I got 1 more. So Hardest Men and
Tarot. Oh, I got 2 more? Okay.
Hardest Men in Tarot says always for trans. And on your channel, Min again says Aron equals Aruha brute facts. Shannon equals Lao Tzu wise facts. You are both awesome hosts. And Steve McCrae says Sarah and Shannon GJ. I'm assuming you guys know what that means because I don't.
Probably good job.
Good job, probably. Steve likes to abbreviate.
Yeah, GJ is good job.
Okay.
GJ is gamer talk for good job.
So awesome job, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Oh,